This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
Everybody in the world keeps secrets, and now there's a way to basically find out the world's secrets, and that's what we do in today's podcast. So I have on Seth Stephens-Davidowitz, who wrote the book Everybody Lies, but it's not that everybody lies, it's that, again, everybody covers up what they don't want others to know. But the one entity they don't hide from is Google. So we know the world's data, we know the world's secrets from what they enter into Google and other sources of data. For instance, Seth tells me about this incredible fetish that exists only in this one country. Seth also reveals by the end of the podcast, really the secret of all happiness. There's so much amazing, mind-blowing data and secrets that we talked about today. I was just blown away. So here it is. Seth Stephens-Davidowitz wrote Everybody Lies, Big Data, New Data, and What the Internet Can Tell Us About Who We Really Are. And there's so much fascinating data in here. Like, I was really fascinated by some of the searches about relationships. Can you describe some of that? And then I want to get into your background and everything, but there's just a lot of interesting facts in here.
Yes.
About what people search for and what that tells us about humans.
Well, there are lots of things. One of the things I talked about is how you can't really trust what people say on social media, but people are more honest on search. So on social media, when people are talking about their husbands and they're posting about their husbands, it's my husband is the best, my husband is the greatest, my husband is so cute, my husband's adorable, my husband's amazing. And then when you look at Google searches, it's my husband's a jerk, my husband's annoying, my husband's cheating on me, I think my husband's gay. It's like a totally different view of relationships on the social media, which is public, and Google, which is private. So that was definitely one of the things.
Well, could both be true? Like, it could be, we don't know if it's the same people posting that their husband is adorable that's also searching for.
I think it just shows that the data you get depends on the incentives you give people. So, I think just like Google is kind of biased towards negative things because you don't necessarily want to tell, like, if your relationship's going great, you don't necessarily feel the need to search Google for anything because you have nothing to fix. But if your husband or wife is annoying you, then you search on Google. And on social media, you don't have an incentive to tell all your friends, I can't stand my husband, or my husband's so annoying, my husband's a jerk, I think my husband's gay. So if you just looked at social media data and said that's marriage, you would be getting not the full picture.
Yeah, like what other like marriage related things did you find? I mean, you talk about a lot of them in here, or relationship related things. What do people search on?
That the number one complaint that people have about both a marriage and a relationship are that it's sexless. And that and the number one complaint that husbands, wives, boyfriends, and girlfriends have about their partner is that the partner won't have sex with me. Like, it easily beats the number two complaint that the partner won't text me back. And like, there are surprising things. There are twice as many searches for my boyfriend won't have sex with me than that my girlfriend won't have sex with me, which goes against, like, we usually think that men, young men particularly who aren't yet married, usually are always want sex, and there's kind of a stereotype that women are, want it less. But in the data, if anything, it seems to be reversed, that there are twice many complaints that a boyfriend won't have sex than the girlfriend won't have sex.
What about the male-female breakdown on, I think my significant other is cheating on me?
It's a little hard to fully break down. Like, Google's data is all anonymous and aggregate, so you don't know always what the breakdown is unless you can guess, like, boyfriend, girlfriend. 95% of people are straight, so you can kind of do it. And I do a whole bunch of things on sexual stuff, where it's pretty easy to know the gender because people say, like, my penis, and it's like, if someone says my penis, they're male. And like, I found that men have more questions about their penis than any other body part, more than their lungs, liver, ears, nose, and throat combined. And for every 100 questions men ask about their penis, they ask 5 about their brain. And the other thing I found is that one of the top questions men have about their penis is, how big is my penis, on Google, which is like a totally ridiculous question to ask Google, right? Like, that's not the way to find out. And I just found out, this is actually a brand new discovery that the James Altucher podcast is the first to hear, that men sometimes type into Google, like just report in a full sentence the size of their penis. So they go like, my penis is 4 inches, my penis is 5 inches, my penis is 6 inches, my penis is 7 inches, whatever. And when you actually analyze all this data, it's a normal distribution of reported to Google penis sizes centered around 5 inches.
Wow.
Which I don't know what to make of that, but I was just like, it just shows, I think one of the things that the Google search research kind of uncovers is the weirdness of humanity. I don't even like to say it's weird because if everybody's weird, then maybe nobody's weird. But you definitely see things in the data that people don't otherwise talk about. Another one that I mentioned in Everybody Lies is that the top search that starts "my husband wants" in India is "my husband wants me to breastfeed him," and that's India and nowhere else. And there in India, in the United States, if there are questions about how to breastfeed, about 99% of them are how to breastfeed a child. But in India, they're about evenly split between how to breastfeed a partner and how to breastfeed a child, which actually is is very, very interesting. Some people just find it amusing or think it's silly or whatever, but it actually shows that I guess a fetish can develop in one part of the world in pretty large numbers without ever being openly talked about. Actually, after I published that finding, a lot of people interviewed doctors in India, and they said that they had no idea, they'd never heard of this, but I'm 100% confident based on the data, this is a thing, and it's just not talked about.
It's so fascinating because, is it really border specific? Like, does Pakistan not have that fetish, or
yeah, Pakistan has it a little
South
bit.
Asian thing, or just India?
It's India and a little bit Pakistan as well, but nothing much beyond that.
You mentioned the earlier thing was like a brand new discovery. Like, where do you get this data right now?
Yeah, so I just use Google Trends, and sometimes I see things, and I haven't seen anybody report that my penis is blank inches. Like, I'll look if anybody else has said that, but I've kind of moved beyond that because initially when I was doing this, like, I think I'd go to give a talk and I'd say, how many people know about Google Trends, which Google reports anonymous aggregate data, and 2 people would raise their hands. Nobody knew about Google Trends, so it was kind of this great secret for understanding humanity, but now it's well known, and there are dozens of academic papers written every month using Google Trends data, and people are tweeting Google Trends findings. So it's a little harder to find anything new.
But that seems like just academic data. Like, I think on average, people I know don't explore the human condition by looking at Google Trends, because you have to look at a lot. Like, you have to sort of ask lots of questions to Google Trends to really find a pattern or a trend.
That's right. I know. Didn't you do a stand-up comedy set based on Google Trends, or is that someone else?
I did something about it, but I did a lot of stuff on reviews on Google Maps, because I didn't realize that every location on Google Maps has reviews like Yelp. And so people would spend the time to review the Eiffel Tower or the Mount Rushmore. And it's just like this. But what's interesting, and where this kind of intersects with what you're saying, is that Google is not only a place to find information you don't know. Google's almost like a confessional. And you mentioned this in the book. Like, for instance, before people have children, you said it was something like, I forgot what the ratio was, 7-1 or something. People wanted to know if they would regret not having kids. And then after they had kids, they would sort of report back to Google and basically search on people who regret having kids. It's almost like they are outsourcing some of their thoughts to the Googleverse.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, before people have kids, it's highly tilted in favor. The question is, will I regret not having kids? And after the fact, it's tilted in the favor of people are far more likely to report to Google regretting having kids than regretting not having kids. Now, I think part of that is people might just be having a bad moment. So I don't think everybody who searches on Google, I regret having, my son or my daughter, that they view this as a major life mistake. And if you ask them day after day after day, they'd say, this was the worst thing I ever did. They may just have not had a good night of sleep, and their kids, maybe it's during the COVID pandemic, although this research was before the COVID pandemic, but their kids have a million problems and they're exhausted and they just can't deal with it, and they turn to Google, I regret not having kids. But those are the types of thoughts that we don't usually see, certainly in everyday conversation, and even as I talk about in Everyday Lies, in anonymous surveys. So the way we got around people kind of lying is we try to ask people questions anonymously and figuring, okay, well, if nobody knows who's giving this answer, you'll be more likely to be honest. But it turns out, and it's been shown over and over again, that people are deceptive even in anonymous surveys, and they don't like saying things that they're not proud of to a stranger on the phone or a stranger there in the same room. But Google, they are more comfortable saying these things, in part because Google gives you an incentive to tell the truth. So Gallup or Pew or Quinnipiac, you have no incentive to say, I regret having kids, or I'm not having sex in my marriage, or these other things. But on Google, you do have an incentive because you can get the information you need.
So I mean, I've underlined a ton of stuff that, like, interesting data, interesting facts that you've uncovered. But let's rewind a bit and talk about how did you worked at Google as a data scientist. How'd you get that job? What'd you do there? What did you uncover there?
So actually, I was writing New York Times columns of my analyses of Google Trends. And then the company reached out to me saying that, you might want to work for us since you have such interest in our data.
Everybody reaches out to you. Nobody ever reaches out to me. I write also. No one reaches out.
I know you're lying about that because I personally reached out to you 6 years ago to get coffee. So at least some fans do reach out to you.
That's true. That's true.
And I would bet that you're being deceptive there, and people do reach out to you. You've certainly done some very varied things in your career.
Your book is called Everybody Lies, so you're probably skeptical of people's honesty in general.
That's true. And I think, interestingly, you may be dishonest in the negative direction. Most people are dishonest in the positive direction. And they say, everybody's reaching out to me and I'm in huge demand. And I suspect, not to be your therapist, that you may be dishonest in the opposite direction, which I also am. So if that's true, we have that in common.
So Google contacted you. You started working there. And what did you do for them? Did you move out to San Francisco? Or did you work here in New York?
Yeah, I was living in the Bay Area. And I was basically doing data analysis. It totally independent from the work I did in my book. I was doing a lot of I was on the quantitative marketing team. So it was a lot of analysis of advertising and just kind of basic data science, which I actually enjoyed. I tend to like everything once I get into it.
What does it mean though, on the advertising side? Like it seems like there could be proactive stuff. Like if you see everybody is Googling stuff about, I don't know, some particular kind of bed, you can inform that bed company, hey, a lot of people are Googling you and then going to other results. We could help you fine tune that. Is it proactive like that, or is it something else?
I wasn't doing that. I was doing more just like analyzing the effects of A/B tests or different projects that weren't really using the search trends as much. I did one project that was using search trends. It was the idea was surveys are small, so you ask 1,000 people a question, and you don't necessarily have data for different geographies, but you can kind of combine that data with Google Trends data and say if people, let's say you ask like who supports Biden, and if people who support Biden tend to be in areas that make a lot of certain Google searches, like search for yoga or search for vegan recipes, then you can kind of predict Biden support throughout the country, even though you only have a 1,000 person survey. So I did a little bit of work on that, which I should be able to talk about because it's public.
And was it successful?
Yeah, it worked pretty well.
Like people at Google could probably do really well in prediction markets where you get to bet on political outcomes, for instance.
There was actually a story that I'm pretty sure like some Google executives at some point came up with an idea we should just be a hedge fund. But then I think Eric Schmidt was like, there's no way that's at all legal. So, but yeah, I'm sure if you had access to moment search data, you could predict the stock market and other things.
You could, for instance, search if in the area where a company is, if suddenly there's a uptick in searches, like what happens when a company fires its CEO, and it's all coming from IBM or whatever, and it's also coming from a law office in New York City that represents IBM, then you could probably make some predictions.
Yeah, and there are just companies use this data, like a lot of times just seeing how their product's doing. I think politicians have used this data to see whether they have to address a scandal. So if like everyone's Googling something, but then basically does the story have legs? So if it gets a lot of attention and then people just stop Googling it, they'll sometimes say, okay, let's just let this be. But if all news covers it, and the Google searches go way up and they stay up, then they say, well, now I need to address this.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what were the A/B tests that you were analyzing? I'm just trying to build a picture of like your experience, like your time at Google.
Oh, I don't even remember. It was so long ago. It was just particular. It's kind of boring. It's not as exciting as the penis searches. Trust me.
But like, is it if they change the search algorithm, are people more likely to click the top results? Is it stuff like that? And you test different search algorithms?
I think the highest level does stuff like that. Mine were more like basic questions or analyzing the effects of experiments and just kind of more general analysis, but nothing too crazy.
And you mentioned this fascinating story, and maybe this got you interested in data originally. You mentioned the story of the guy who bought a horse for like $1 million.
Jeff Sater.
Yeah, Sater. He used a data-driven approach, and I might have heard of this guy actually. Stephen Dubner from Freakonomics told me about a guy who had essentially almost like a hedge fund betting on horses, and he was using a Moneyball or a data-driven approach. I wonder if this is the same guy.
Yeah, it probably is, and it may have been because I was on the Freakonomics podcast talking about it, so that may have been what got Stephen to talk about. I'm not sure, but this guy Jeff Sater, he is like a totally brilliant guy. He has 3 degrees from Harvard University, and he was working in banking at Citibank in his 20s. And one day he came home from work. He saw himself in a suit and tie in the mirror, and he's just like, this is not me. I'm not meant to be a banker. I'm not meant to wear a suit and tie every day. I'm not meant to live in New York City. So he fled with his 3 Harvard degrees to rural Pennsylvania, and he wanted to be in nature around horses in the woods. And he spent the rest of his life analyzing what makes a great racehorse great. And amazingly, this was before Moneyball, before the term data science existed. But he was way ahead of the curve that he wanted to figure out what makes great racehorse great using data. And he tried all these things over the years. He's like an eccentric dude. And he told me, I flew down to Florida because I found his story so fascinating. And I met with him over a weekend. And he was telling me all these things he tried. He's like, he measured the size of horse nostrils. He had this theory that horses with big, wide nostrils would breathe better, and that would make them run faster. And he created what I think to this day is the largest horse nostril data set ever assembled. And he tried that out, like, do these horses with big, wide nostrils run faster? And he found out, no, they don't. And then he measured the size of their leg muscles. Do horses with big, wide leg muscles run better? Makes a lot of sense. Didn't turn out to predict success. And he tried to measure the size of horse poop, the size of their defecations. He literally stood outside the barn and was measuring the size, like the diameter of horse poop, and said, do horses with big, wide poop run faster? And he found out that no, it doesn't work. And he tried all these things to a horrible failure. I'm pretty sure his wife was on the verge of leaving him. He was probably close to bankruptcy. And then he came up with the idea he worked with a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He built the world's first EKG to measure the size of internal organs of horses, including the size of different ventricles of their heart, including the size of their left ventricle. And he put this in the data set he had built, and he found that horses with big left ventricles just run faster than everybody else. And that's why he made the prediction that American Pharoah would be a once-in-a-generation horse, because American Pharoah had a 99.6 first percentile left ventricle, and nobody else except for Jeff Sater knew that he had this left ventricle or knew that left ventricle was so predictive of success. So it's an amazing story.
How did he get the data about that specific horse? Meaning, like, let's say he's going to an auction and there's 20 horses for sale. Would he make them all go through like an EKG, or?
I think he just has to like rub it near their heart outside the barn. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it was a small device that allowed for it. I'm not totally sure, but it was amazing because he showed me the card and it was just like, wow, American Pharoah, based on his model, just had to be an incredible horse. And nobody else thought that when American Pharoah was 1 year old. Like, basically the way every other horse analyst predicts horse racing success is using pedigree. And American Pharoah's pedigree was just basically average. So everyone's like, yeah, this horse is fine, nothing special. And Jeff Sater just had this model and was like, no, this is like going to be a once-in-a-generation horse. And then it was a once-in-a-generation horse. and the first to
Yeah,
win
won
the
the Triple Crown the
Crown
year
in 37
after.
years. And then another horse, I think it was Justify, won the Triple Crown again. And I emailed Jeff. I'm like, tell me, did he have a big left ventricle? And he's like, yeah, it was enormous as well. So yeah, it's really cool.
And so how much money do you think he made? How much money did he make on that one horse?
I don't know exactly because he's also not he's I think he's less into it than for money than other people. He said that on some podcasts he's been on, and I think it's basically true. Like I hung out with him, and he was just obsessed with trying to figure out horse racing success more than business, as far as I could tell. But he didn't tell me how much he made. It was basically he sells his service as consultants to horse owners. And what he did is he had a client who was trying to sell American Pharoah, and he told the client, "Don't sell this horse, sell your house. Like there is no way you can sell this horse. He is too good." So he saved the client, from a huge mistake. And I don't know how much the client paid him. If he got a bonus out of it, I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, because that horse probably went on to a big career in being a stud as well. So he's probably made tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, that's where most of the money in horse racing is.
Yeah. So when I hear stuff like this, I always think to myself that, okay, is a data-driven approach to this kind of analysis where you could have real world, positive outcomes, including making money, I feel like, is it too late? Because every domain has been conquered. Like, Moneyball did it for baseball. I actually know a guy who's doing it for football and doing very well. I'm just wondering what domains, you feel are like unexplored for this.
I think it's definitely not too late, in part because after What Everybody Lies, some companies reached out to me and they asked me to help them consult. And like 90% of the companies, I'm not exaggerating, initially apologized. They're like, our data science is so pathetic. Like, we know you're expecting a lot more and we just have a lot less than you suspect. And when every company is saying that, I think, like, I'm like, you're doing nothing wrong. You're just like, that just says that there's still a way to be way ahead of the curve. I think there are some fields, if you're competing if you're going to try to create a new search engine or a new social network, I think you're going to have trouble competing on the data science front with Google or Facebook. But if you're in any industry, Wall Street, I think, is another area where the best data scientists do work there, and you might have a tough time having a huge edge. Baseball is maybe one area where you might struggle to find an edge, except every few years a new book comes out about how a different team used data analytics to become great. So first it was Moneyball covered the story of the Oakland A's, and then there was a book about the Houston Astros. I think it was Astro Ball, and then there was a book about the Tampa Bay Rays, how they use data analysis to kind of beat the system. So even baseball, which is maybe the quintessential example of a field where the secrets of the advantage of data science have spread widely, there seem to be ways to still have an edge using better data science or advancing. And I think the other thing the Jeff Sater story tells me is that frequently the way to have an edge in data science is not by having better models than everybody else or just thinking to use data science. Everybody can do that. In many ways, every horse consultant was a data scientist. They just looked through the same books that everybody looked through and ranked and saw how good the pedigree of the horses were, and then consulted their clients based on that information. But what Jeff Sater did is he was entrepreneurial. He actually went out and got new data that nobody else had. So he, measured the size of their horse nostrils, and he measured the size of their poop and the size of their legs, and he built the EKG, and he did all these things. And that being entrepreneurial, doing annoying things that nobody else wants to do, I think you can always have an edge, basically indefinitely in life, because most people are drawn to the lazy approach to just using the same data sources that everybody else is using. So if you're willing to put energy into collecting new data, I think you could have an edge in just about any field.
It's really interesting because there's two things happening. One is how unique and different is your model from all the miles prior. Now, that doesn't mean your model is going to work, but it's a combination of that, using a unique model to uncover something that is very common. Because what you're trying to uncover, let's say, is the best horse. but you want to go about it in a way that no one's ever gone about it before, because that will be the arbitrage in price ultimately, or the arbitrage in whatever it is you're transacting. So it's uniqueness combined with commonness. You're using the unique to find the common.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it's interesting because, the book's titled Everybody Lies, but it's really, and you mentioned this in the book, it's not so much about lying, it's sort of about what you're doing is using this data that is always out there to find the industry's secrets.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, what you were just saying about relationships, or what you were saying about India, even doctors and, therapists probably didn't know this was a big thing in India, Indian doctors and Indian therapists. And yet it's something 1 billion people, give or take, search on Google. So it's like this big, massive secret that no one talks about. They feel comfortable talking to Google about it because because like you say, they have an incentive to learn more.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with data science is you have to be willing to be surprised by the data. So like, I think a mistake that a lot of data scientists have is, I think one of the reasons Jeff Sater was so successful is he was, I think by his own admission, a little eccentric, and maybe, I think a partner of his who I met, Patty Murray, just said he's crazy. And I think that can be an advantage in data science because most people just test what everybody else has already been using. So you just look at the pedigree, you look at the times they ran. Most people aren't like, could poop size correlate with success? Nobody thinks that. And then if you do think that, a lot of times you're wrong, but occasionally you're going to be right. And, I kind of did this. I talk about in the book. I studied this site, Stormfront, which is the largest hate site in the United States. And actually, the way I came up with the idea to study Stormfront is I was Googling myself because I'd written an article and I got excited because this message board was talking about me. They're like, Seth Stephens-Davidowitz wrote this article. I had written an article about racism or something. I'm like, I get excited. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm in the news, whatever. And then I look at the site and it's like,
Seth
like
Stephens-Davidowitz.
Jew. Yeah, I was like, Jew, Seth Stephens-Davidowitz. And like, analyzing my face and how Jewish I look. And I'm like, oh God, what the hell is this site? This isn't so cool. And then I just found out that it was the biggest hate site in the United States. And I was shocked that the biggest hate site in the United States was, when you look at the actual message boards, was predominantly focused on Jewish people. I'm just like, what the hell? Like, that's not, like, I grew up with kind of an idea that anti-Semitism was deeply in the past in America. And I grew up in a town that was 40% Korean, 40% Jewish. Like, I don't think there was much anti-Semitism that I detected. And I went to universities that were all very Jewish and with, as far as I could tell, zero anti-Semitism. So I wrote this article about Stormfront, and I just found out like recently that I wrote this article and my dad told my mom that Seth has gone crazy. He's like, Seth has lost his mind. He's down into conspiracy theories. Like what the hell is he talking about? That there's some, anti-Semitism, anti-Semites congregating on the internet in the United States. Like, he's lost his mind. And neither my dad nor my mom told me that they had that hypothesis. And then the Charlottesville protest happened, where there were all these people chanting anti-Semitic things. And my dad goes to my mom, I guess Seth was right. And I think what I take from that story is you have to be willing to let the data take you to places that seem crazy to other people and just stick with the data and say, I don't care what anybody says. I am seeing, the data is not telling me that 10% or 20% are visiting this site, but the data is telling me a lot of people are visiting a site that is predominantly focused on theories of how Jewish people are running society. And my dad can think I'm crazy, my mom can think I'm crazy, but I'm going to put that data out there into the world. And more times than not, the world catches up to the data and it gets revealed in some other way. Maybe we're going to find the breastfeeding thing some other way, and I can tell people I told you that Indian men have this fetish. Not all Indian men, but more than other places.
What were some other things that kind of surprised you? That again, it's not that everybody lies. It's not like that Indian men lie. It's this. It's a secret. I'm really more fascinated by the term secret. Like that society as a whole keeps all of these deep secrets, like whether it's anti-Semitism or some fetish or whatever, and we're not really aware of it because we don't really know what anybody else is thinking, because they might be so secretive that you don't want to talk about these things. It's like, what other thing? But Google knows it all.
Google knows it all, and other sites know it also. I also in the book analyze data from Pornhub and speak about a site that knows a lot about people that people aren't gonna normally talk about. That's an area where there's a lot of stuff that's surprising or not talked about. I was struck in the data. There were more searches than I was expecting and more views in pornography sites for overweight people than I would have guessed. And I think that was really interesting because there's also data from dating sites which suggests very clearly that people try very hard to date people who are skinny, that being overweight is a huge negative in dating. And that made me think that there's a sense in which being in the closet is more widespread than we sometimes think. So the traditional definition of being in the closet is a gay person who pretends that he or she is straight. So the person is attracted to members of the same sex, but due to social pressures, they pretend that they're interested, a desire to conform or desire to make other people think highly of them. They date members of the opposite sex. And I suspect that phenomenon is more common than just gender, that a lot of people try hard to date people because they'll impress their friends, or they think other people will think they're cool, or other people will think they're normal, rather than what they're really interested in. Because the data from pornography shows that what people are most deeply attracted to varies much more than is usually talked about. But what people look for in dating, it doesn't always vary so much. So I do suspect that there are, for example, men who are more attracted to overweight women and would be happier and more fulfilled if they dated an overweight woman, but because they are embarrassed about that attraction or think other people will judge them negatively, try to date skinnier women instead.
What do you think it is about, in this case, overweight women that, and I could understand the reasoning why, but I'm curious your interpretation. Why do you think that is? So on the dating side, I understand they're trying to impress their friends, but in the fulfillment side, why would a weight determine a higher degree of fulfillment?
Why are people attracted to people of certain types? What causes those attractions?
Or in this particular case, why do you think being in a relationship with an overweight woman might be more fulfilling, whether it's sexual or just the relationship in general?
Oh, no, because I think some people, the range of what people are attracted to varies quite a bit. And that for some people, for whatever reason, are more attracted to overweight people. Some people are attracted to brunettes, redheads, blondes, bald people, people with full heads of hair, tall people, short people. There's a pretty wide range of what people are attracted to. I think a big question that this data will ultimately help us answer is what causes such attractions. So why are some people attracted to types of people? There's some evidence that people get imprinted from a very young age from the people they see around them or the people they have a first romantic experience with and tend to be attracted to that same type the rest of their lives. They've actually done studies with, I think, ducks where they paint like the mother's beak red. And then for the rest of their lives, the kids of that mother with the beak that was painted red seek out partners who have red beaks, which suggested that some attraction, at least for many animals, comes from certain key moments in childhood. So, but that's an area well beyond my expertise, although that usually doesn't stop me from opining about topics.
I kind of feel, and data sort of shows this, there is no such thing as expertise. That's a lot of what you're telling me. Like take the Jeff Sater's example with horses. Most people buy on pedigree, and the experts will analyze pedigree, and they're experts on pedigree, and they'll tell you what horse to buy based on pedigree. And it turns out they forgot to check the left ventricle. So they weren't really experts at all compared to Jeff Sater.
I think that's right, although that can be taken too far. There have been studies on on successful entrepreneurs where they've looked at the entire record of entrepreneurs in the United States, and there is an argument that outsiders have an edge in entrepreneurship. David Epstein's book, which is excellent, Range, has a whole chapter, The Outsider's Edge, that you have an edge if you come from kind of a field, a different field, because if you're so stuck in a field, you're going to be so constrained by what everybody else is doing, you're not able to see kind of new solutions. But if you actually look at the data of every business created, there's a huge insider's edge that the closer you are to even the subspecialty you're starting a business in, the more likely you are to be successful. So I think some of what happens is the non-experts who succeed, we get so excited by their stories, and they're so almost because they're counterintuitive and they stick out. We love telling the stories, and then we kind of lose track of the fact that it still is the exception. So it's not like you can't be an outsider and revolutionize your field. Jeff Sater has shown that there have been many entrepreneurs who have created successful products in an area they knew nothing about, but it's still the exception rather than the rule. The other example of that in business is age of entrepreneurs. So there's this idea that youth is an advantage in business. And we hear all these stories. There was a movie, The Social Network, a Hollywood blockbuster about Mark Zuckerberg starting Facebook when he's 19 years old. And people started thinking, oh, you can start a great business in your dorm room, or you can start, a great business shortly after college or in your late 20s. And if you look at the data, not the stories or the movies, the most successful founders of businesses tend to be in their mid 40s, and your odds of creating a successful business increase up until the age of 60. And the average business owner, the average successful entrepreneur who is not turned into a Hollywood, for whom there is not a Hollywood movie made, is someone who learned a lot about their field over many, many years, excelled in that field, and then went off to start something on their own in middle age or even sometimes later.
I completely believe that. Like, just anecdotally, my own experience, whenever I've started a business because I thought, oh, this is the next hot thing, it's always failed. But if I started something where it was an area that I had been doing first for fun, then for years for little money, and then became an entrepreneur, those would tend to be more successful.
Yeah, in the data, there is something close to a formula for entrepreneurial success when you look at the data, because the odds of success are so much higher if you did something in that field, showed success in that field, were already making a good income in that field, and then went out on your own when you had a lot of experience in that field. The chance of success are just monumentally higher. That doesn't mean that you can't start a successful business in your dorm room, or there are people. Susie Baptiste is one of the richest women in the United States. She created a product, Poo-Pourri, which gets rid of the smell in defecations. You pour it into your toilet bowl and you get rid of the smell in defecation. And she had no training in the field. She wasn't a chemist. She wasn't, a scientist. She wasn't anything. She just kind of had this eureka moment and did it. And it happens. It's not like it's impossible. But I think people hear those stories and they think that that's likely to happen, whereas it's not. There's clearly mathematical evidence and data that shows that your odds of success are just way higher if you have experience and success in a field over a long period of time.
Well, as someone who is aging, everybody's aging, but as someone who's getting older, I'm older than I was when I started a lot of companies, and this is encouraging news. What other age-related things surprised you? People always say mathematicians do their best work in their 20s, but I'm not sure this is true either. I read one study where if you judge success in mathematics by how many other papers reference a paper you wrote, it turns out older mathematicians have more successful academic research published.
Yeah, and part of the youthful advantage in some of these fields is because young people just write more papers, partly because older people are busy on committees and things like that. So quantity adjusted, as a percent of papers written, there even tends to be more of an advantage towards older people, but some older people just aren't as driven and don't put as much work out there. There are some advantages to youth, definitely. In art, Professor Galenson at University of Chicago has basically found that there are two types of artists, and one type of artist just blows on the scene at a very young age. And that an example of that is someone like Bob Dylan, who I think most people agree, even Dylan himself said that his best work was done in his 20s. But there are other artists who are more experimentalists and tinkerers, and those artists tend to get better with age. So an example of that would be Leonard Cohen, who wrote his best work probably in his 50s. So there can be advantages to youth that some people, your brain, does have more horsepower at younger ages. So for poets, mathematicians, there definitely can be advantages that some people take advantage of to do great work at a young age. But some of the advantage of youth is a myth in many domains, certainly in entrepreneurship. And the other thing about the study of entrepreneurs and age is it's true even in the field of tech. So you'd say, okay, I'd understand how that would be true in some really boring business, but tech is such a fast-moving field with all this new technology. You'd think in that field, you need to be really young to understand the newest trends. But even in tech, the most successful entrepreneurs tend to be in their 40s.
It's so interesting, because that does go against a lot of basically you're busting mythologies with data, which is kind of the story of history. Like the story of history is basically new religions and new belief systems completely developing because new data shows the old belief system didn't work. So like Christianity, for instance, had to evolve as we learn more about the shape of the universe.
I was reading recently, there was some study, people had all these ideas that like superstitions around age, that there are certain years that just people die a lot. And then someone collected all this data and found that wasn't true, that your chances of dying, there were no jumps at any particular age. And that really did change things about how people viewed. It did. The data actually worked in kind of getting rid of those myths. And recently there have been papers analyzing time of birth, and basically horoscopes. So do you see personality differences for people born, for Virgos or Tauruses or whatever I don't even know anything about horoscopes, but do you see these patterns? And not surprising to me, there were no relationships. There's no difference. These things are all myths. The idea that people born on particular months or particular dates are going to take on certain personalities is not true at all. And we'll see if that, I wouldn't be shocked if that does lead to fewer people following horoscopes, believing in this astrology.
This always assumes that people read academic papers, which they don't.
Well,
like no one cares actually about facts.
Well, it's not, but then you have popular science writers. So now I'm kind of moving into the arena of popular science, and now I'm spending a lot of my day reading a lot of academic journals and and trying to get these ideas out there and making them entertaining for people and going on podcasts and talking about them. And, I'm actually surprised by how much credence people give to data, and people are willing to change their mind more than I expect when you show them a compelling data point in that direction. I don't kind of agree. There's a notion that everyone's so stuck in their ways that they just ignore facts, and it hasn't been true in my experience.
It's interesting that, you mentioned earlier that you were talking about penis size, that it fit a normal distribution. So, normal distribution is, how would you describe it to somebody? It's like how our tests were graded when we were kids. It's, the idea that there's an average, and if you could beat the average person at something 2 out of 3 times, then you're 1 standard deviation away. If it's like, I don't know, 4.5 out of 5 times, you're 2 standard deviations away, and so on. But then you have people like Nassim Taleb, who believe that most domains could be better modeled by some sort of power law distribution, like the way earthquakes are modeled. And So financial markets, for instance, are normal until they aren't, is kind of the expression. Like you could use a normal distribution model of the stock market to make money year in and year after year after year, and then suddenly you'll lose all your money because of this black swan event. And so there is a risk to data.
Yeah, so Nassim Taleb, kind of popularizing some ideas by Benoit Mandelbrot, says that a lot of financial markets are run by power laws, where a normal distribution, there's an average, and most of the people will be very close to the average. As you get further and further from the average, you get fewer and fewer people there. And to the point that if you're talking about 3 standard deviations out from the mean, they're very, very few. And then 5, 6, 7, 8 standard deviations, they're just like nobody. And power laws are a little different, where even way out, numbers way out, they still happen. So wealth is an example of this, where if wealth was a normal distribution, you'd have everybody, you'd have the average, let's say, the average wealth in the United States, which I'd have to look up what it is, but $121,000 is the median wealth in the United States. 121,000 median wealth, and then you'd have most people right near 121,000, and you'd have only very few people above 300,000, and then you'd have nobody above 10 million, 20 million, let alone 100 billion. And what we know is that wealth doesn't work that way at all. That it's a power distribution, and you can have people very, very far from the mean. I don't think that argument goes against data science. It just shows you have to correctly analyze the data and know whether you're dealing with a normal distribution or a power law. And there are usually ways you can figure out whether you're going to deal with power law. Power laws tend to come from anything with kind of multiplicative effects, where some initial edge is going to lead to even more edge. So that certainly happens in wealth, where if you get, some people start using your product, you get some capital, you can build on that and build even more wealth. It happens in city size. So city size is also a power law. Zipf's law, it's a power law distribution. And if your city is popular, more people are going to move there, and it's going to feed on itself and the biggest city is going to be far bigger than we'd expect if city size was a normal distribution. But some things like IQ, height, don't have that phenomenon, where they're just to the best of our knowledge, they're kind of additive effects of a whole bunch of genes. And having one of those genes doesn't make you more likely to have another of those genes. So there's nothing that's leading to these power law effects.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then you could say, okay, in a normal distribution, like if you want to predict stocks, for instance, most of the time, probably a normal distribution of price movement works. But there are situations where everybody is either buying or everybody is selling. There's too much panic or too much greed, and then it kind of flips over into a power law distribution. Like on a normal day, like last month, people were a little too panicked, and so anything can kind of happen. But on a normal day where maybe the market's going to go up, maybe it's going to go down, nobody really knows. Then a normal distribution tends to work better.
Yeah, and that's actually another example I would say that's another example of using data to do better in a field and even become rich, where I would say that Nassim Taleb's success came from reading the work of Mandelbrot, who he says he was a big fan of, that first said that stock prices didn't follow a normal distribution, basically looking at data, collecting a huge data set of stock prices and commodity prices and saying that they fell by power laws, and realizing that Taleb from that data realized that extreme events were underpriced in the market, and there was an inefficiency, and you could make money by betting on extreme events because the probabilities of those events were priced as if the data fit a normal distribution, whereas actually they fit a power law.
Well, it's interesting because, and you refer to this in the book, something that Peter Thiel said, that a good business is all about what, I forget the exact quote, but a good business is about what secrets you're unveiling, and that's the key to making a great business. And it's because somewhere there's this arbitrage between how people value something based on what they expect that something to be, and there's a difference between expectations and reality. And so, like, if you were starting a business, how would you use that concept, that Peter Thiel's concept, that a business is all about what secrets you're sharing? How would you use that to start a business?
Yeah, I think the examples we talked about have fit that model. So Jeff Sater had a secret about horses, that the left ventricle turns out to be really predictive. Nassim Taleb had a secret about the market, that it's more power distribution than people realize. Zuckerberg had a secret about people, that they're more nosy than they let on, as I talk about in Everybody Lies. And I think the key to using secrets to start a business is you don't always have to be the first one to have noticed this or the only one who knows it. It still can be as long as it's not common knowledge or hasn't been, Taleb's insight that the market had more black swans than people realized or that were priced in, again, was not an original Taleb idea. It was, as far as I can tell, first discovered by Mandelbrot, but it wasn't properly priced into the market. Similarly, with the A's and how they revolutionized baseball, they initially weren't doing anything proprietary. They were basically implementing ideas from Bill James, which had been around for decades. So Bill James, for decades, was writing books about how baseball was, how data shows that baseball teams are run all wrong, and that bunting doesn't make sense, stealing doesn't make sense, walks are undervalued. And baseball teams just ignored this. And then Billy Beane said, I'm going to use this. You could call it a secret. It's not that nobody knew it, but it was a secret in the sense that it wasn't being paid attention to by other baseball organizations. And Beane said, I'm going to use this secret to build a better team. And it basically largely worked.
Yeah, or take this woman who made the poopery, the thing that makes defecations not smell. What would you say is, I mean, it's not really a secret that people don't want to smell that.
Or that they
I'm wondering,
smell.
or maybe the secret is that you could make it not smell. Like, I didn't know you could just pour something in the toilet that could make it not smell.
I think, from what I understood, she did a bunch of experiments and largely got lucky. And that happens too, which is why I say that is not a story you want to build your life around, because it's not a scalable model to just, a lot of things in life have been serendipity. And, you maybe want to put yourself in situations where serendipity becomes more likely, but you don't want to assume that serendipity is going to happen, or assume that's assume that that's a great path to life success.
But you use the same word when describing her and Jeff Sater, which is that they both did lots of experiments. So the thing about data modeling is that you could have a theory, and then you collect the data and you test if the theory is right based on the data, and you're going to be wrong a lot of the time. The data will tell you whether you're right or wrong, and the theory is just a theory, but the data will tell you the truth. And so maybe a key is always be willing to be persistent about these experiments with data.
I think that's right. And you got to be willing to fail a lot on your way to a victory. And then I guess the other thing is, when you have that victory, go all in. So a lot of people, if I had played around with various chemicals and thought that I found one that got rid of the smell of feces, I probably would have convinced myself that was insane and gone back to writing books. But I guess having the chutzpah to say that I've figured something out that can lead to hundreds of millions of dollars can be good.
I mean, I have so much stuff outlined, I don't even know where to go. But you know what was interesting was the data about stories that people had modeled, like, I guess, hundreds of stories, and sort of showed that each one had, every successful, let's say, novel or play or movie or whatever, had a very specific kind of arc. And it was roughly like the arc of the hero, but there were like more components to it. Like what interesting thing did you derive from that?
Yeah, it was using something called sentiment analysis. So that's a tool that data scientists use where certain words are positive words, so happy, good. Certain words are negative words, such as sad or bad. And you analyze the positive words, negative words, and you see that the sentiment of successful plays, movies, stories tend to follow certain paths. There isn't one path; there are a whole bunch of them. But the data scientist has discovered about 6 of them. Which is pretty cool. And if you're trying to write a story, I definitely read that work and try to see if you fit them, if you fit one of those models. Because if you don't, it seems like...
They differentiated from stories that weren't successful?
Yeah, exactly. So, if you don't have that pattern, you're less likely to be among the more successful stories. So it's interesting also because I think sometimes data sharpens the picture in that, like, there have been definitely Hollywood that I've read many books over the years of people from Hollywood talking about what makes a great story. And some of the patterns uncovered in data science were hypothesized, but I don't think anybody had found these are the 6, exactly the 6, types of successful stories. And that type of clear, sharp picture you frequently can only get in a convincing way if you analyze lots and lots of data.
Again, what other area that you researched in the book or afterwards did you suddenly realize, oh my gosh, this is this big secret? I never could have imagined this.
Let's see. This is one for my upcoming book, Don't Trust Your Gut. These scholars, they analyzed tax data, digitized tax data, and basically studied every rich person in the United States. They have this sentence in their paper. I couldn't believe it didn't get more attention. They go, the typical rich American is the owner of a regional business, such as an auto dealership or beverage distribution company. And I just read that. I'm like, what the heck? Like, that was not who I thought of as the typical rich American in the United States. And so I read the paper closer, and then I also did some of my own data analysis based on some of their comparing their charts to some other sources, and you kind of see that who gets rich in the United States? Well, it's mostly people who own, who don't rent their time, who don't have wages. So there's a ratio about 3 to 1 among the richest Americans in owners versus wage earners, which I kind of figured out over the years, but I definitely did not know that when I was 20 or 25. And then it seems like there are certain industries that are just really, really good at creating rich owners. So auto dealerships is one of them. Beverage distribution, some other middlemen. Investing in real estate, that's kind of well known. Market research. And it seems like what these industries allow is a lot of local monopolies. So auto dealerships are regulated local monopolies where you only can start there. If you have if you're the auto dealer for a car company in a region, basically you're protected by law from competitors, which is a very good place to be as a business. But other companies kind of have these flavor as well. So market research is a very scalable business. So you can kind of write up your reports on your very niche interest and then sell it to a whole bunch of people. And it's hard for someone else to have the same contacts that you built in your industry to compete with you, to just totally take away your prices. Beverage distribution is a regulated industry, also helps. Investing in real estate, kind of hard for one firm to totally dominate because each investor kind of many different investors have their own strategies and are able to differentiate or claim they're differentiating in ways that allow them to make money.
Also, there's 100 million homes out there. So,
yeah,
but it's hard for one person to have 100 million homes.
It's true, but there are 100 million homes who need painting, and paint companies that are painters aren't creating a lot of millionaires because people just ruthlessly compete on price on those in many of these industries. So there are only certain companies that allow you to kind of avoid, for whatever reason, this ruthless price competition that destroys a lot of businesses. The combination of that you need to be in a business, you have to somehow kind of build some sort of moat, either with the help of law or the help of scaling or the help of industry contacts. Somehow you got to prevent just being like, a lot of these industries that aren't creating millionaires where people start businesses, people just search on Google and pick the cheapest one. And you're just destroyed. All your money goes to competing to be higher on Google's advertising, to be higher ranked in Google ads. Basically the thing I took from the data is business is where the money is, but it's particular businesses. And the other thing in the data, which I kind of also learned over the years, but was really striking, is like sexy businesses just freaking suck. So like the quickest field with the shortest average lifespan is record stores. The average record store is out of business in 2.5 years. And other businesses that are right near the top of the list of worst businesses, the shortest lifespans, are toy stores, clothing stores, makeup stores, game stores. That kind of goes to the Susie Baptiste lesson, which is if something's seems kind of cool and exciting and makes for a great story, people jump on it, and too many people jump on it, and it's actually a horrible career decision. So you don't want to learn from Richard Branson's success in record companies. Like that was a one-off thing. Don't read his biography and try to pick up lessons. Like just look at the data and know that the average record store, I mean, nobody goes to record stores anymore, so that's part of it. But same with all these sexy sexy companies. They're just awful businesses.
No, I agree. Like somebody once told me that the uglier the business, the more likely you have a chance of succeeding. And so this guy specifically, he was in the business of collecting trash and then he would filter out the metal that was in the trash and he would melt it down and sell, it's called slag. He would sell this slag to, as a commodity, a metal commodity. And it was just an ugly business. He was basically this enormous trash collector, but he'd make money on, he had a process for weeding out the metal and selling it, like the aluminum and selling it.
Yeah, but I think ugly is a necessary but not sufficient condition because you can just be stuck in ruthless competition. Even a lot of ugly businesses like Bug Exterminator, nobody wants to do that, but I think the data is pretty clear that people aren't getting rich doing that because they're just in ruthless price competition. So it's not just as simple as pick something boring and you're good to go. You really got to always be thinking of how can you have your little moat around competitors so you're not just stuck in horrible price competition.
Right, and scalability is important too. Like exterminators might not be able to scale.
Yeah, exactly. Although like scalability is another thing where it can be a little overdone, where if it's too scalable, it also becomes a dangerous business for an individual. It's a good business if you're an investor, but like if you start a social media company is incredibly scalable, but it's so scalable that we end up with like a few social media companies and that's it. Which is also not necessarily a great place to be from an individual entrepreneur's perspective, because your life becomes almost too much of a lottery. And it's better to be it's great if you're an investor and you can make 1,000 investments and just pick all the social media companies and just say, I'll end up with whichever one wins this, scales correctly. But an individual, I think you want I always say local monopolies are good. You want scale, but not too much scale. Is a good place to be because then you can avoid price competition, but you can also avoid this winner takes all phenomenon where you're just there's going to be a few sneaker companies that win, a few social media companies that win. And I think as an individual, that's a dangerous life path. It may work, but that's kind of one of those things where you get, if the universe plays itself 1,000 times, you get rich in 3 of them. I think it's better to try to make life decisions where if the universe plays itself 1,000 times, you get rich in 500 of them, 600 of them, 700 of them.
Tell me about the next book. You said you were working on another book and we talked earlier about it. It's kind of like using data to sort of, improve your life.
Yeah, it's called Don't Trust Your Gut.
Don't trust your gut, and it's coming out in May. And we'll have another podcast about it. But let's talk about just a tiny bit about it now. Like, what are some of the things you'll be sharing in that book?
Yeah, so I basically just read. I kind of retired myself from my Google search analytics and read every academic study I could find on big life decisions and what does the data tell us, and present that as trying to help people make better life decisions. One of the motivations with this is I'm a huge baseball fan. And we talked about Moneyball, and I kind of realized that baseball has changed so much since due to the Moneyball revolution. So when I was a kid, the game of baseball looked different. Like the infielders all stood in the same spot on every play. And now every play, the infielders are all over the place. There's something called the infield shift, which data scientists discovered was actually a better way. It looks insane, but you put most of the infielders on one side of the field, it actually leads to better outcomes. And I was thinking about like our personal lives, and I feel like most of us don't really use make data-driven decisions. We generally do what feels about right and go with our gut. So kind of what would a data-driven life be like? And I think the area where there's the clearest and the Moneyball analogy extends best is dating. So there have been studies. There's work by Samantha Joel where she studied 11,000 romantic couples, and she worked with 85 other scientists. She had every possible trait you could measure on them: their sexual tastes, their demographics, their values, their physical appearance as ranked by other people, and how happy they reported being in that relationship. And she and the other scientists used machine learning to try to find what is it about a person that predicts you're going to be happy in a relationship with them. And the overarching lesson is that it's incredibly hard to predict who makes someone happy. Like, it's shockingly unpredictable. You would think that like many qualities about a person would dramatically improve the odds they make you happy. And it seems in the data, there are some things that moderately improve the odds, but they're not that big. And the striking thing about that study is you contrast that with scholars have studied online dating, and they've mined through everybody's clicks and messages, and they say, okay, what makes someone desirable in online dating? And that is incredibly easy to predict. So it may be hard to predict who's a good romantic partner, but it is so easy to predict who's desirable partner. In fact, they can even predict with high accuracy, not just whether you're going to swipe left or right, but how long it's going to take you to swipe left or right. Because if someone's close to your barometer, it's going to take you a little bit longer to make that decision. So like, we're just lemmings on these online sites. And what predicts someone's more likely to be clicked? They're beautiful, not surprisingly. That's by far the biggest predictor. It explains conventionally attractive people, way more desirable. Tall men, each inch of height, scholars have found, is worth about you have to make about $40,000 of income as a man to overcome like being 1 inch shorter.
Oh my gosh.
Certain occupations, not in women, in men, lawyers, people in the military do way better in online dating. Students do horribly. I spent most of my life as a student and did horribly in dating, and now I know the reason for that. People who work in transportation, in hospitality, disaster for men on dating sites. Similarity to oneself. People are drawn. There's this idea that people are drawn to opposites. It's totally not true. On just about every dimension scholars can measure, people are drawn to people who are similar to themselves, even on seemingly silly things like how many photos you include in your profile. And my favorite, that people are 17% more likely to match with someone who shares their initial on an online dating site. Like, totally ridiculous. If someone shares your initials, you're more likely to match with them, even take into account everything else like their religious background.
I'm just curious. So on an online date, this is not relationships, like long-term relationships or marriage success. This is just being selected for a date. People will subconsciously note, oh, this person has 12 photos that they're sharing.
Yeah.
I have 12 photos. And so they're more likely to click on that.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
that must be just a subconscious
Yeah, it
thing.
must be subconscious. And initial is probably the same thing.
I just have a question, like for all the ladies out there, Jay, the producer of this podcast, is recently single. And then what should Jay do on his dating site profile?
Oh, well, so I think there have been some ways you measure success. I always think more how you pick someone, not how you improve your profile. There's some obvious things: have better pictures. This one caught me by surprise. Like, I had horrible pictures because I didn't really care what I looked like, and then I improved my pictures and I dramatically improved my dating prospects. There is some evidence. This is the most interesting evidence that you can improve your dating success by being an extreme outlier. So I said that it's predictable what people click on in online dating, and that conventionally attractive people, taller men, men who are lawyers or military people, things that you can't necessarily change, are more clicked on. But there's some evidence that if you weren't gifted some of these traits, if you're not a 6'3" gorgeous male or a gorgeous woman, you can do better by being an extreme version of something, having a high variance. So Christian Rudder has discovered that if you have a higher variance, if some people really like you and some people really hate you, you'll do better. So people who do well are like women with shaved heads, or people with colored hair, or people with really wacky glasses. And what happens then is that you turn off a lot of people, but some people are really, really into you. And that's all that really counts in dating, is to have some people really, really into you. So that's kind of an interesting strategy. If you're not like lighting up the dating world on your natural traits, if you're not Brad Pitt or Natalie Portman, who everybody wants to date, you can sometimes have more success by being an extreme version of yourself, and then having some people extremely into you. But the thing that I find, the best strategy I find in dating based on the data, is it's very similar to Moneyball, where Moneyball pointed out there was an inefficiency between what was valued in the baseball market and what actually made a good player. So data-driven teams had success going with players. There's an example of Kevin Youkilis, who didn't look like a first baseman. He was kind of a little chubby, shorter than most first basemen, but he had these great stats that made him a good bet. And the data-driven teams were obsessed with Kevin Youkilis because other teams kind of weren't properly pricing him. And dating is exactly the same, where the fact that the dating sites show that people are like consistently drawn to these qualities that don't lead to long-term happiness, conventional attractiveness, really tall men in certain occupations, people who are similar to themselves, etc., that you can really hack the market a little bit by focusing more of your attention on some of the groups that are not getting the attention. So shorter males, for example, and I'm not just saying this as a shorter male myself, I'm happily in a relationship. So I'm not, this isn't self-serving advice to try to get more women intrigued by men like me who are on the shorter side. But it is true in the data that there's zero correlation between height and long-term happiness, but there's this incredible correlation between being clicked on and height. So for women who are heterosexual women who are struggling to perpetually single and trying to date these 6'2", 6'3" guys, well, the competition for these men is ferocious. And if you end up with one of them, the data says you're no more likely to be happy. And if anything, the fact that you ended up with them, it may be because they're so highly desired, they might have some other negative traits, like they may have some very bad psychological traits that make them still available. It's a horrible place to focus your energy. Focus your energy on these groups that aren't getting the attention that they deserve. So, even racial dynamics, it's a little, politically incorrect, but there is horrific racism in dating. That's been shown in many studies, particularly, for example, African-American women, huge penalty. It's horrible. It's not talked about. We talked about racism in careers, in interpersonal dynamics, in police stops, in getting a taxi cab. We don't talk about racism in dating, but that's maybe the area where the evidence is strongest. African-American women, Asian males do a lot worse in many ways on online dating sites. But if you look at correlations, long-term happiness, there is zero correlation between the race of your partner and how happy you are. So it's another huge inefficiency where the market is saying that certain races is being prejudiced against races for no reason, and the actual suitability as a mate is not correlated with race at all. Well, focus more of your attention on these groups that aren't getting the love, And you're going to find you may get a mate with way better other qualities because the rest of the market is punishing them. And I told this finding.
This is like great advice.
Thank you. It's almost too good advice because I told this advice to my girlfriend, and I think she's thinking of leaving me and finding an Asian American male who has better qualities than me, and using my advice against me or something.
Jay, stay tuned.
Yeah, Jay, you just need to wait for my book comes out, and then you're in good shape.
Other than dating, like what other domains is your book going to cover?
Happiness is a big area where they've done all these studies. So I became obsessed with this project, Nappiness. It's by this guy, George McCarran and Susanna Morado, where they've been pinging people throughout the day. And they're saying, what are you doing and how happy are you? And like correlating this with other things because it's from iPhones. And there's a Nappiness project. There are other projects. Happy Air does this. Track your happiness. And it's like kind of a revolutionary understanding of what makes people happy because we haven't had, they've collected like millions of data points on asking people how happy you are and correlate with all kinds of things around what's going on with their life. And like they found cool things like sports makes people miserable on average because the average boost when your team wins is about 3 points in happiness out of 100. And the average loss when your team loses is 7 points of misery. So basically the average sports fan is making a horrible happiness deal, almost like a drug. That's another one. Another one they found is that alcohol gives people a mood boost. This is another study by McCarran where alcohol gives people a mood boost, but the biggest mood boost, and this is dangerous advice, so I know if people have history of alcoholism in their family, I don't want to suggest this, but if you don't have this history, the biggest boost if you're drinking is if you're doing something boring, like the chores or commuting. And if you're socializing with friends or doing something fun, you actually get only a very moderate or no boost, which is exactly the opposite way of how most people use alcohol. So most people, you're having a great time with your friends, and you're like, well, now I'm going to make it even better by having 4 beers. And the actual data is that it doesn't make people, that doesn't actually improve your mood. But if you're doing chores, getting ready to go out, like all these things, you're actually, if you do it tipsy, you're actually like get this huge boost in happiness. So I don't have a history of alcoholism in my family. So I read this study and actually started adjusting myself a little bit where I'm like, okay, if I'm going out, if I'm going out with friends, maybe instead of having the beer with the friends, I'll have the beer like in the shower while I'm preparing to go out and take that boring activity into a fun activity. And then I'm with my friends and I'm already having fun, even sober. So I don't need to drink anymore. So I take these things a little too far. Like I just read these paper and it totally changes my life. And I'm like, oh, now I'm going to change everything. I think some people don't do that as much as I do. But either way, it's good to know. And
it's great to know.
It's always the other thing about these studies is they're just interesting. The other thing that the data shows, which was comforting, is we're kind of told that there's some secret to happiness. And there are some things that are counterintuitive, drinking when you're doing the chores or drinking when you're commuting or not watching sports, even though you think you love it. Like that's a little counterintuitive. But a lot of the studies, like I describe them to people and they'd be like, that's so freaking obvious. Like people are happier in nature, or people are happier when they're around beautiful scenery, or people are happier. The happiest single activity is having sex. And people are like, do we really need scientists to tell us this? Like, isn't that, pretty freaking obvious? Or people are happier on 80-degree and sunny days than they are when it's cold or rainy. It's like, come on, like that's just confirming the obvious. But I think there's something a little profound in the obvious nature of these findings, because a lot of the people who are criticizing me, saying all these, criticizing me are really the scientists who published these discovered these things are saying, oh, come on, I didn't need a scientist to tell me that. But then you look at their actual life decisions and they're doing none of the things that these obvious things that make people happy. Most of the people who criticize me are workaholics. Well, work is the second most miserable activity. The only thing that makes people more miserable on average than working is being sick in bed. So like they're working all the time. They don't have great sex lives because they're too busy and tired from work. They're not spending time in nature because they're living in cities where they get these lucrative jobs. So I conclude the book with what I call the data-driven answer to life, And the data-driven answer in life only uncovered by scientists such as McCarran, Murado, thanks to iPhones, thanks to 3 million pings in cell phones, the data-driven answer to life is being with your love on an 80-degree and sunny day, overlooking a beautiful body of water, having sex. And it's like, it's the most obvious thing in the world, but like, just keep that in mind when you're complaining that you're miserable. Like, how far is your life from that life of what actually makes people happy? And can you spend more of your time doing these very, very obvious data-driven answers to life's, to life's problems, which, it's not necessarily, it's not so easy to be by the beach. People are really happier when they're by water. It's not so easy to be in an 80-degree and sunny climate. It's not so easy to have sex. You need to find a partner, or, presumably. But these aren't impossible. And my advice to anybody who's miserable is to ask whether they're putting enough time into organizing their lives so they're actually spending time doing things that the sometimes obvious things that make human beings happy.
That is so fascinating. This has been such an eye-opening podcast, and I can't wait to come. So you're always welcome to come back, give us more data each time, and particularly for your this upcoming book. What's it going to be called again?
Don't Trust Your Gut.
Don't Trust Your Gut. Is it on sale right now?
Yeah, you can pre-order it. Yeah,
I'm going to buy it right now. I'm going to pre-order it right now, and definitely come back for that. And this has been great, Seth. So, author of Everybody Lies, and soon to be author of a new book, Don't Trust Your Gut. Come back for that one. It's coming out in May, but we'll have you on before then. And thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Oh, one last question.
Yeah.
Data has been a big topic in terms of COVID. Like, I don't know if there's any insights there, but what do you see in the data about any of the data at all about COVID that is unexpected?
Well, the only thing is, when COVID started, I was using my Google search expertise. Someone suggested I do this, and I think I actually found a new symptom of COVID. I'm pretty sure I did. I wrote a New York Times column where I basically said that, like, every time every area that had a COVID outbreak, you'd see people search for eye pain. And like, it was very clear in the data, it was much higher than other symptoms, and nobody was talking about eye pain as a symptom. And then I published this in the New York Times. I'm like, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I just think people should look into this because, I've analyzed the data as best I could. I've talked to everybody I could talk to. And as far as I can tell, eye pain searches are rising every time COVID spikes in an area. And it's not due to people using their screens more, or pollen rates or other things you might think it's caused by. And then, like, about a year later, the biggest study on eye pain found that sore eyes was the biggest eye symptom of COVID, and a significant symptom in about 15% of patients. So I was pretty proud of that, even though it got like no attention. But it again shows to the power of data analysis and being willing to kind of put yourself on the line. I talked about Stormfront when I wrote this article about the hate site, and my dad told my mom that Seth has gone completely insane. And I think a lot of people, when I said eye pain's a symptom, they're like, Seth's not an epidemiologist. What's he doing publishing a New York Times article claiming he's found a new symptom? But as best I can tell, I was right about that symptom. And I think you have to be willing, when the data shows something and you've tested everything you can think to test otherwise, to go with it rather than your gut, basically. Kind of similar to this book coming up and this advice we've been talking about in dating. And like, it might feel weird to shave your head or dye your hair or dress like a weirdo or be a total nerd. And you might think that's not the right approach to dating, but the data has said that can improve your odds of getting a date by about 70%. So even though it feels weird or feels wrong or seems a little crazy, I think you have to, in 2022, you have to be willing to do things that feel a little wrong, but that the data says are actually right.
Man, I am loving this stuff. This is gonna change my life. I'm gonna start obsessing on data. So, Seth, thanks again for coming on the podcast. I'm glad finally, after 6 years ago, we talked about you coming on the podcast. Finally, you're on the podcast. This is so great, and I'm looking forward to the next one already. So, thanks again.
Thanks so much, James. This has been fun.